In this module, we're going to talk through the data needed for generating a score in each of the 5 categories in ARC. These are energy, water, waste, transportation, and human experience. We'll start by covering summary information on the data needed to generate each category performance score. Once we've outlined the basic data requirements, we'll take a deep dive through each category to further break down how the score works, how to input data, and where to find the analysis information on your score. Let's get started with the summary data requirements for each category. To generate a performance score in energy, you'll need to provide 12 consecutive months of total energy use for the whole building. Include all energy sources such as electric, gas, steam, and solar energy used in the building. Determine who is tracking the information for the building and how the data is being tracked. You will need the information on a regular basis, at least monthly. And optionally, you can include data from the previous 12 months to get started. Let's take a closer look at the data needed to generate a water score. You'll need to provide 12 consecutive months of total potable water use for the building. Include all end uses such as irrigation, HVAC, restrooms, pantry, cooling towers, and fixtures. Determine who is tracking the information for the building and how the data is being tracked. You will need the information on a regular basis, at least monthly. And optionally, you can include data from the previous 12 months to get started. Now, let's take a closer look at the data needed to generate a waste score. You'll need to provide the weight of materials generated on a typical day and the weight of materials diverted from landfills and incineration on a typical day. This information can be collected from the following activities. Conduct at least one waste analysis within a 12-month period to reflect the weight of waste generated and diverted from the building. A service provider can also conduct a waste audit and provide you with the information needed, along with recommendations to improve performance. Alternatively, you may already receive periodic reports from your janitorial services provider or waste management provider. These reports may contain the information needed. Review the reports to ensure you have the weight of materials generated and diverted, the time period over which the materials were collected, which materials were collected and which materials were diverted, and assurance that the materials were appropriately diverted from landfills and incineration. Now, let's take a closer look at the data needed to generate a transportation score. You'll need to obtain occupant commuting patterns, including distance traveled and mode of transportation. To collect these data, administer at least one survey and collect responses for a minimum number of occupants in the building. The minimum response rate is normally 25%, but may be less depending on the occupancy in your building. The response rate required for your project is calculated automatically by ARC and reflected in the transportation section of data input. Collect the minimum number of responses at least once every 12 months to maintain the score. Finally, let's take a closer look at the data needed to generate a complete human experience score. You'll need to provide data for occupant satisfaction, interior carbon dioxide levels, and interior total volatile organic compound levels. To obtain the data needed for occupant satisfaction, administer at least one survey and collect responses for a minimum number of occupants in the building. The minimum response rate is normally 25%, but may be less depending on the occupancy in your building. The response rate required for your project is calculated automatically by ARC and reflected in the occupant satisfaction section of data input. Collect the minimum number of responses at least once every 12 months to maintain the score. To obtain the data needed for carbon dioxide and total volatile organic compounds, conduct at least one indoor air quality evaluation for these compounds. There are 2 primary ways to conduct an evaluation. Use protocols consistent with one of the methods you see on the screen. Or use a device called a photoionization detector, sometimes called a PID. If you decide to use a PID, take note of some of the following methodology requirements. Readings are required per 25,000 square feet of the building and must be taken during regular business hours from regularly occupied spaces. Samples should be collected from within the breathing zone, or 3 to 6 feet from the floor, and at least 3 readings per sampling location are required, allowing for a minimum of 30 minutes to elapse between readings. Carbon dioxide data should be measured in parts per million while total volatile organic compounds should be measured in micrograms per cubic meter. These multiple readings must be entered into the calculator accessible in ARC in order to derive a single input value. Retain a narrative describing your procedures, how locations were determined, dates, times, results of each sample, and include floor plans identifying the locations for sampling. Now that we've covered the minimum data requirements, let's discuss how those translate into a performance score. The score in ARC is based on a 365-day rolling average, so today's score is always taking the previous 365 days into account. Data older than the most recent 365 days is no longer incorporated into the score, while new data entered into ARC ensures the score is kept up to date. Category scores in ARC are both weighted and unweighted. Each category's unweighted score is from 0 to 100 and reflects the total performance of a project in a specific category, with a score of 100 representing near net zero performance. Scores are weighted to align with green building priorities and most heavily weight direct impacts to climate change and human health through carbon, energy, and human experience. Each category weighted score is simply the unweighted score multiplied by the total possible score of the category weighting. For example, a project with an unweighted energy score of 73 out of 100, or 0.73, would show a weighted energy score of 24 out of 33. This is because 0.73 multiplied by the possible weighted energy score total of 33 is 24. A project scoring the same unweighted water score of 73 out of 100 would see a weighted water score of 11 out of 15, because 0.73 times 15 is 11. As a reminder, for any scores to appear in ARC, consumption data must be added, as well as occupancy, operating hours, and gross square footage. Now that we've learned what data is needed in ARC and the basics of the performance score, let's take a deeper dive into how each category in ARC works.